How to improve safety culture without spending a penny on new systems. Now, let's start with something that most leaders never say out loud. When people talk about improving safety culture, well, it nearly always sounds a bit expensive. We're going to have new systems, new platforms, new programs. We might have to get new consultants involved. And for a lot of leaders, that's where the conversation quietly ends. Not because they don't care about safety and not because they don't want to do the right thing, but because they're already feeling a little bit stretched. They're anticipating what's coming next. A request for budget, a request for time, a request for energy. And often, well, let's be honest, all three can feel in a little bit of short supply. So if you've ever found yourself thinking, yeah, safety culture, it really matters. But realistically, I just can't take on another big initiative right now. Well, you'll be pleased to know this episode is for you because today isn't about launching something new. It's not about buying in any new systems. It's not about adding more to our already full plates. It's going to be about understanding how safety culture actually forms in real organizations and why it changes far more through everyday leadership behavior than through any system that we might install. Now, before we go any further, I just want to deliberately slow this down because safety culture is one of those phrases that it's used so often it can start to lose meaning. It becomes abstract, conceptual. I remember somebody telling me it was something that was a bit fluffy. It's something that people talk about in meetings rather than something that people actually experience in their working day. So let's talk about this. Safety culture isn't a document. It's not a dashboard. It's not a value that we get printed out large on a wall or scribbled on a wall. It's about how safe people feel to speak up, how safe they are doing their jobs. It's how problems are handled when they surface. It's what happens when safety competes with time and cost and reputation and convenience. In other words, culture shows up often when there's a bit of a trade off. And that matters because most leaders don't make decisions in calm and perfect conditions. Wouldn't that be lovely? We tend to make decisions when we're under pressure. We might not always have complete information. We might have multiple priorities that are pulling us in different directions. But that's where the culture is really living. It's in those cracks, it's in those struggles. Now, most organizations don't really struggle with safety culture because they don't care. They're struggling because they're busy. They're stretched. They're operating with lean teams. They're managing delivery, performance, and clients and people and compliance. And often it's all at once. Under that kind of pressure, that's when the unspoken rules can start to form. People notice which conversations get welcomed. They notice which ones get quietly shut down. They notice whether raising a concern leads to curiosity, genuine interest, or discomfort. They notice what gets praised, what gets tolerated, what gets brushed aside because now just isn't the time. Now, over time, those signals shape behavior far more powerfully than any formal system ever could. That's why two organizations with identical policies can have completely different safety cultures. The paperwork might be the same word for word, but the lived experience isn't. So let's think about a situation that you might recognize. You're in a meeting. Deadlines are tight, as they often are. There's pressure to deliver. The agenda is, as always, very full. And partway through, someone raises a safety concern. It's nothing dramatic. No one's been hurt. It is just something that doesn't feel quite right. Now, as a leader, you acknowledge it. You say, yes, that's important. And then you move on because there's a lot to get through. Now, no one is being deliberately dismissive. No one was being deliberately careless. But there was a message still being sent there. And the message is, this matters, but not right now. Now, imagine that happening again and again and again. Eventually, people stop raising concerns. And it's not because they don't care, but it's because they've learned when it's welcome and when it isn't. And that is how the culture is being shaped. Quietly, repeatedly, and often without intention. Now, this is usually the point where organizations reach out for systems because a system feels tangible, something that is controllable. We feel like it's an action. We can do KPIs, we can minute it. We look for a new platform, a new reporting tool, a new policy, a process. And yes, absolutely, let's be clear, systems do matter. Policies, procedures, processes absolutely have a role in our businesses, in our organizations. But the systems, they don't create the culture on their own. They amplify what already exists. If the underlying signal from leadership is inconsistent, then systems are not going to fix that. They're just going to add to the complexity. They're possibly going to trip us up. This is why organizations, well, we can invest heavily in safety management systems, yet still struggle with that engagement, that reporting, and trust. It's something I see so often in all different industries, where the system is visible, but the behavior underneath it often isn't. So what changes safety culture? Because it's not perfection. It's not zero incidents, and it's not leaders who have all the answers. What's actually going to change the culture is consistency. If leaders responding in predictable, fair, human ways, especially when pressure is on, it's going to make a difference. Instead of asking who was to blame, we should ask, well, why did this happen? What were the root causes? Instead of rushing past concerns, we pause, even just briefly, to acknowledge them. Instead of treating safety as a separate agenda item, we should be weaving it into everyday conversations about work. As leaders, we should ask questions like, well, what got in the way? What made this harder than it needed to be? What would help next time? These questions don't require new systems. They require awareness. And it's great because awareness is free. But awareness does require intention. Because let's face it, under pressure, even experienced, well-intentioned leaders revert. When we've got delivery pressures, we've got cost and reputation, when these things are all on the line, safety can and does often quietly slip down the list. Not because it doesn't matter, but because something else feels more urgent in that moment. And it's those moments where people are watching most closely. They're watching what's being prioritized, what gets deferred, what gets quietly sacrificed to keep things moving. And that's why culture is shaped most strongly when trade-offs are visible. Not when everything is calm, not when the organization is well-resourced, but when it's stretched. That's when people decide what really matters here, what shortcuts might be taken. Now, I want to just share a short reflection before we close, because What I have seen time and time again is that most leaders genuinely want a positive safety culture. And what gets in the way isn't intent, it's pressure. It's pressure to deliver, pressure to keep things moving, pressure to avoid opening conversations that feel like they might slow everything down. And I've learned that the moments that really shape culture most, they're not the big formal ones with the grand gestures. They're the small decisions. They're the small decisions that we make when we're tired, when we're busy, when we're stretched. Do we pause or do we push on? Do we listen or do we defer? Do we treat safety as integral or as something that we're going to come back to later? Now, when we ask ourselves some of these questions, it can feel uncomfortable, and that's okay. But it's where leadership shows up most clearly. So let's stop here for a moment and be really clear about this. You do not need a new system to improve your safety culture. You don't need grand gestures. Most of the time, you just need to notice what's happening in front of you, the signals that you're sending, the behaviors that you're reinforcing, the things that you're maybe quietly tolerating. Because culture isn't being built in programs, it isn't being built in platforms, it's being built in moments. Leave me a comment and let me know how you create a safe culture, or let me know one thing you're going to take forward from today. I just want to thank you for spending this time with me. And if this episode resonated, then make sure you subscribe to Work Well, Lead Well. Next, we're going to be looking at risk assessment and how to approach them without drowning in paperwork or losing sight of what actually matters.